All right, everybody, we've made it to our Worlds at War, the massive crossover storyline that pits Superman against the force of entropy known as Imperiex. Before we get into the discussion, which I really hope that you enjoy, a couple of quick notes here. First, I look at our Worlds at War as the climax of the Jeph Loeb, Joe Kelly era on the super titles for a couple of reasons. One, it brings full circle a number of thematic and narrative threads that the creators set up all the way back at the beginning of their run. Additionally, while both of those creators, as well as the other folks who worked on the other titles, do continue on for a period of time after our Worlds at War, the triangle numbering will actually go away very shortly after our Worlds at War, and the books will gain much more autonomy than they had before. There will be occasional crossover storylines, most of which we've already talked about in other episodes, like Return to Krypton 2 or Ending Battle. So for me, I really do look at our Worlds at War as the climax of the Loeb-Kelly era on the titles. That being said, I wanted to announce that we're going to do a special bonus episode this coming Friday looking at the aftermath of our Worlds at War. So specifically in that episode, we're going to focus on the immediate month following our Worlds at War, some very key developments as Superman and the rest of the DC universe are emerging from the fog of war. We'll see Superman don a black and red shield, a modification to his costume to signify his period of mourning. We'll see him wrestling with getting back out there and how he's going to operate. We'll see him get called before the Quintessence to answer for his actions during our Worlds at War. And we'll see him offer a second chance to a quartet of villains. And we'll see which one actually accepts. Beyond that, we're also going to zero in on Mark Schultz's final issues of Man of Steel prior to that title's cancellation, and the final issues on the Superman title by the creative team of Jeph Loeb and Ed McGuinness, because they stayed on the book for almost another year before they departed to launch Superman Batman Public Enemies. So that's what we're going to cover in that bonus Aftermath episode on Friday. And speaking of Public Enemies, that's the subject of our episode next Tuesday. One last note about our Worlds at War itself. You'll hear Perry and I talk about this in our episode, but we made the conscious choice to focus on the core Superman titles that comprised the event, as well as a couple of essential Jeph Loeb written tie-in specials. That means we did not go through all of the other one-shots and tie-in issues of other titles. Overall, it was a decision made to foster, I think, the most focused, streamlined reading experience and conversation. So that's what we focused on in the episode that you're about to hear. And believe me, we still had more than enough to talk about here. Last, but certainly not least, I just want to thank everyone who has been part of this Loeb-Kelly era event, all guests and audience members. Hopefully this has come through in the recordings, but man, I have had the best time. As you guys know, this is a period of Superman comics that meant the world to me as a kid. And what a treat, what a delight to find that it resonates with me even more today for its heart and its humanity. So it's been an absolute blast. I thank everyone who's come along with me on this ride. And I want to give a special shout out to former guests Scott Honig and Mike San Gregorio. Those guys joined me way back on episodes 2 and 3 of Digging for Kryptonite almost 5 years ago, because we started this podcast with a pair of episodes looking at the Loeb-Kelly era. So they joined me for that. And those initial conversations, I think, were so helpful at the very beginning of this Superman podcast journey. So I wanted to give a shout out to those guys. All right, folks, enjoy this episode on our Worlds at War. Make sure you come back this Friday for a special bonus episode on the Aftermath. Next week, we'll be hitting Superman Batman Public Enemies. And the week after that, our 200th episode. Enjoy. Fat Moose Comics, established in 1982, is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Led by current owner Sean Hendricks, Moose has that rare, old-school comic shop feel and camaraderie, yet also remains a welcoming space for new fans. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you are in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. If you have children and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow them on social media. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw, yeah. In late 1999, writers Jeph Loeb and Joe Kelly took on Superman. Over the next 2 years, they would upgrade his city, test his heart, warp his reality, elect his greatest enemy, and bring intergalactic war to his doorstep. It's the final chapter in the Triangle era, one of my most cherished runs, and the subject of a 7-part Digging for Kryptonite epic. It's the Loeb-Kelly era. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Our Worlds at War, the climax of the Loeb-Kelly era, is the host of Superhero Cinephiles, returning guest, Perry Constantine. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I am really excited to get into this with you.
Yes, so this was a crossover storyline that ran for 3 months, June, July, and August 2001, and it spanned the 4 core super titles as well as a number of one-shots and tie-in issues of other titles. And this featured the heroes of the DC Universe and an unlikely alien alliance led by Darkseid, dealing with the cosmic destroyer Imperiex, before the true final boss, Brainiac 13, was revealed. And this brought to a head a lot of the threads, both narratively and thematically, that Loeb and Kelly and the other creators of this era had been building towards over the prior 2 years. What role does this story play? Because I do believe it's a formative one, right? In your Superman fan journey and reading career?
It is, yeah. So I like, when I think about my Superman era, like the one that, kind of made me a fan of the character, it is the Loeb-Kelly era. I was working in a comic book store at the time, and there was a Emperor Joker. I missed when it came out, but there was like my comic book store, they had bundled up all the issues together and they sold them as like a set. So I bought that whole set and I read that, really dug it. And I was a reader of Wizard at the time, and they were talking about, there was all this buzz about the Kelly Loeb run that was starting up. And it was somewhere around there. I think 775 was definitely a very formative issue that I picked up, and it really kind of grabbed me and it just kind of smacked me in the face. And I've talked about before when I've been on your show in the past that when I was in high school, I had kind of drifted away from Superman for a time, and I was kind of in the mold of, like, I think a lot of teenage guys go through, where it's like, oh, Superman's so lame, Batman's the cool one. And, it was, our mutual friend Bernie Gersmeyer, who was my teacher at the time, who was a big Superman fan. So I'm just like, well, I'm working in a comic book store. Bernie seems to like this guy. Let me try and give it another chance. And it really and that just happened to be the Loeb-Kelly run. And it really kind of spoke to me in a way. And eventually, and I think it was Return to Krypton is when I started buying all the books. So I was full in on all the Superman books, and that continued throughout the entire run of Our Worlds at War. And then shortly after that, I started dropping off a little bit here and there. But also I was thinking about it, and I think this may have been the first big company crossover that I was actually reading in real time, because, Onslaught, I had come to that afterwards. And then in the early 2000s, there wasn't a whole lot until really like Civil War or House of M. And so this was kind of like the big crossover that was reading in real time. Everything else I read after the fact.
Gotcha. Yeah. I have to say this at the top here. So, as everybody knows, big fan of this period in Superman comics. When it comes to Our Worlds at War specifically, I think the way that I've typically thought about it and the way I've spoken about it whenever it's come up in these episodes is that I think historically Our Worlds at War didn't totally land for me, or didn't deliver exactly what I wanted it to, or didn't totally deliver on the potential of this period of comics. I think that's the way I felt in the past. I don't feel that way anymore. I gotta tell you, I had such a great time with this reread. And I come away from it saying to myself, this Our Worlds at War event was a banger. And I really stand by this. And I think what did it for me this time, and why this time and not the other times per se, I don't know. And it's not that I disliked it before, but it just never totally worked for me. But I think this time around, I came to appreciate the war motif even more, because I feel like that really does set it apart from the typical kinds of crossovers that you get. It's not a wave of antimatter energy that they're fighting. Like, this is very kind of practical and tangible, which I think was beneficial to the story. But more than anything, I really love the way it challenges Superman because it pushes him to his limits in a way that other stories typically don't. I mean, you really see over the course of these stories how the unrelenting pace of the war, the staggering number of casualties suffered, the compromises that he's forced to make in terms of, as I said, this alien alliance, taking orders from President Luthor, all of it takes a toll. And there is this sense of him being disoriented and really kind of lost that you don't often see. And of course, he makes his way all the way through to the other side of it by the time, well, there's still a lot to sort out even by the end of this, but he makes it through the worst of it. But I really dug this journey that we go on with him and the way that he's challenged and how that's different than you typically see from these stories. So I really stand by Our Worlds at War. And I would say if people have not read it, don't sleep on this one. Because to your point about just these crossover events generally, I was thinking about this. And unless I'm like totally blanking on something, which is possible, we get so hyper-focused on whatever it is that we've prepared to talk about that sometimes other things kind of escape our sight. But is this not the last time that Superman and the Superman stable of books drove a huge crossover like this? I mean, I can't think of anything offhand since then that was like this.
I mean, I guess you could maybe you could make an argument for Final Crisis, but even then, it is much more. I think maybe that's one of the reasons this didn't land as well, because, to your point, I don't think you're alone in having that now that you've come around, but that initial view of it over the years, I don't think you're alone in that, because I was kind of curious. I've always loved this story, but I haven't read it since it first came out. So after rereading it, I'm just like, let me just see what other people are saying. So I kind of did some searching on Reddit to see what people were saying about it. Not a whole lot of discussion, and the discussion on it was pretty mixed. Like people were saying like, it's, it's mediocre, or it's got some moments, but it's not that great. And I think there are two reasons for that, or possibly three. So one is, I think the time period that it was set in was definitely kind of a weird one, because looking back on it now, I think people might look at this and erroneously think, oh, well, this was obviously inspired by 9/11 and the War on Terror. But no, this started before. Superman 171, which kicks off this whole thing, came out a few weeks before 9/11. And, the finale, the World's Finest special, that came out in October of that same year. So that was even before we had invaded Iraq.
Wait, so those, I think that's going off of the cover dates. But in terms of the publishing dates, it was June, July, and August. And the reason why not to be overly specific about this, but the reason I bring this up is that the issue of Adventures of Superman that kind of came in the month after the crossover wrapped up, that's that infamous issue where you have the smoking, damaged Lex Tower. And that came out on September 12th, 2001. And
okay.
DC, it was just an eerie coincidence that you had this imagery of the tower the day after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and DC actually made the issue returnable. There's been misinformation about this. It wasn't recalled or anything like that, but they did make it returnable. But it was just this like eerie, unfortunate coincidence. Obviously the issue had been written and drawn and printed and shipped before 9/11. But yeah, that's the time frame that we're in. I know, but yes, to your point, this was not a response to 9/11. This was right before.
Mm-hmm. I think some other issues with it are, first off, there's a lot of tie-ins on this. And, we were talking before about when we were prepping for this, like, what are we going to read and everything. And, the reading order I found had about like 45 issues total. And honestly, you could scrap about maybe half of those and you could still get the full story. And I think the tie-ins, they kind of dilute the story's potential when you read it all together like that. That's kind of what I felt going back to this. But also too, this was billed as like this big DC crossover event. And I think that was kind of a marketing mistake, because I think it should have just been billed as a Superman event, because it is really hyper-focused on Superman. I mean, you think about DC events, Batman has like no role in this. He appears in a handful of issues and he's always like this peripheral character at best.
No, 100%. And I think that might be one of the reasons why I didn't get as much mileage out of this. I mean, if I'm going back, obviously I read all of these as they were originally coming out. And the story is divided into 3 acts. So we have Prelude to War, All Out War, and Casualties of War. And I think that will lend itself well to our discussion. We can kind of organize our conversation around those different segments. But so at the time, I read everything. And I mean, at some point in my youth, I'm sure I reread it at least one time. And then I don't think I really came back to it again until we covered it in episode 3 of Digging for Kryptonite almost 5 years ago. And I can't remember at that point, I might have stripped away some or a lot of the tie-in issues. I don't remember at this point. But for this reading, yeah, we had some back and forth because at first you were very gung ho. You're like, let's do all of it. And I was like, all right.
I'm like, yeah, let's go for it. I'm game.
and as we got closer to it, I mean, look, here's the thing. I'm game for reading projects and I will get my homework done no matter what. Time is short though. So there was a little bit of that going on, but more than that, as I was getting closer to this, I was like, I don't know that will lend itself to the best reading experience. And so this is kind of a big important point. I think for anyone who hasn't read it, my strong advice is to just read the main Superman titles: Superman, Adventures, Man of Steel, and Action Comics. And there are 2 one-shots that you want to make sure you hit. One is JLA, Our Worlds at War, written by Jeph Loeb. And the other is the epilogue issue to the entire event, World's Finest, Our Worlds at War, also written by Jeph Loeb. There are other one-shots or tie-in issues along the way that are really good reads. Like there's a Batman, Our Worlds at War special written by Ed Brubaker. That's fantastic. And there's an issue of the Superboy title, and we talked about this when we covered the Joe Kelly run a while back during our Kano event, the War Letters issue, which is great. Like those are some great reads, but in terms of the overall narrative, you don't need them. And while those reads are good, I think if you pull in everything else, I think dilutes it is a perfect word. And I think it's kind of easier to lose the main thread. So I would really say focus on those core titles and those couple of one-shots. And that will really give you the entire story. And if you love it and you're like, I need more of this, I want to see all of the kind of side missions. I want to see the JSA destroy Imperiex ship. I heard that reference in one of the books. I want to see that happen. Then go to that JSA Our Worlds at War one-shot. But I wouldn't necessarily start with that because I think it does dilute it, to your point.
Yeah. And some of these, I don't know what DC was thinking when they were planning these one-shots, because some of the one-shots don't even tie into the main story as well as some of the actual issues of said title. Like, for example, Young Justice has Our Worlds at War one-shot. It has like almost nothing to do with the Our Worlds at War story. But the actual issues of the Young Justice comic tie in a much stronger way to it. And also the Wonder Woman Our Worlds at War one-shot, it was just basically a recap of everything of Hippolyta's whole life. And I'm like, this is completely useless, completely unnecessary. But there were a few Wonder Woman issues that had some pretty impactful scenes in it that were, and I think I don't know what DC's plan is with this upcoming omnibus they got coming out, but I think if you take a few pages from a few of those issues, like some of the Wonder Woman issues, maybe some of the JSA issue, and insert them into the appropriate points, that might make for a better read. But as for the full story, yeah, you don't need all of these. And I just want to comment too, because I'd found this out, because this wasn't on the DC app, but it was on one of the reading order lists I found. But Joe Casey did a 4-part Superman Batman arc years after this. And it was billed as an Our Worlds at War, follow-up. So I'm like, oh, okay, let's look at that. And honestly, I don't know why he did that. Because I read the issues and there was no reason it really had to be tied into Our Worlds at War. It could have just been set in the modern day without any problem.
Yeah, to be honest, and I appreciate you tipping me off for that. I've still not read that in full. I did skim through that. Yeah, I wonder if that was an instance of him saying, I want to do a Worlds at War thing, or if he had the story and someone in editorial or marketing was like, hey, there's an alien. We could say it's an Our World at War follow-up. I mean, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, I would say.
Or maybe if it was some story he had from back during his Adventures days that he never got to do. I don't know.
Yeah. But in terms of just kind of the overall organization and management of this as an event, I don't know that it totally hit the mark, but that core storyline is really strong. I would say, we'll kind of go through, like I said, these 3 main acts of Prelude, All Out War, and Casualties of War. I would say big picture, there are a few kind of fulcrum points where the story really, really takes a turn. At the end of the first month, the prelude to war, we have the annihilation of Topeka, Kansas. So that's the ground zero moment, Imperix's first strike. So that's a huge moment. And then not too long after that, we have a pair of huge casualties, Wonder Woman's mother, Hippolyta, and Lois's father, Sam Lane. And then at the beginning of the casualties of war segment of the story, we have the reemergence of Warworld under the control of Brainiac 13, who steals the Imperiex energy that's released when Imperix's armor is cracked. And that really launches us into our endgame. So I would say those are kind of like the three biggest pivot points throughout. But we'll talk about everything along the way. Real quick, in terms of background, like we've talked about all of this stuff along the way, but just to kind of tip our hat to the creators, and Jeph Loeb in particular, because he was really doing the heavy lifting with this. They were calling their shots, man, from the beginning. I mean, Loeb's first 3 issues of Superman from late 99, 151 through 153, we talked about them, but those are the ones where Mongol II shows up to warn Superman of Imperiex and to train him to be a more ruthless fighter. And they have a battle in space with Imperiex, or so they think, and they defeat this Imperiex. But then we, the reader, learn that wasn't the real Imperiex. That was one of his probes, and the threat is still out there. So that's late 99. And then in June 2000, we get Superman 159. This is right after Critical Condition. And this is the one where Superman and Kyle Rayner are palling around in space, checking to see if Superman's powers are up to snuff after his health issue. And this is where they discover that the planet Pluto is missing. This will be important later. And this is also where they encounter Maxima, who is leading what remains of her people in this retreat. And this is the wild part to me. She explains to Superman in that issue that they're fleeing from Imperiex. And he's like, oh, but I defeated Imperiex. And he never investigates it further. And when we get into Our Worlds at War itself, when he encounters Maxima again, and you'll likely remember this, she calls him out on this. She's like, I warned you and you did nothing. And you know what? She is right. Like, I would love to. What was Clark's thought process with this? Like, he just was like, oh, that's weird. Okay. And he lets it go.
I mean, in defense, he spent like 1,000 years in another world with Wonder Woman. He had to deal with Emperor Joker. He had to deal with cancer, all that kind of stuff. So he had going back to Krypton, finding out everything he knew about Krypton was a lie. A lot of stuff happening back then. So this kind of fell through the cracks. It happens,
I guess. It's just in retrospect, it might have helped if he at least acknowledged, like, oh, I got to look into that. And then he just got sidetracked. But I don't know. He just kind of lets that go. And then in December 2000, the Superman 165, the Christmas issue that Bernie and I talked a lot about during the President Lex, when we get the reactions of all the Justice League members to Lex becoming president, it's a great issue. But that one starts with the Linear Men being attacked by Warworld, which is what Pluto has been converted into. So that's kind of, I would say, our general background. And I might be missing other references to Imperiex along the way, but I don't really think I am. I think those were really kind of the key instances where we get set up for this. So that's the kind of long-term background of it. And then in the month right before Prelude to War, Adventures of Superman 592 by Joe Casey, and it's the first issue by Mike Wieringo on art duties. And that's the issue. We talked about this when we did our Casey episode years ago, but that brings back Strange Visitor, who has a very key role and makes a huge sacrifice in Our Worlds at War. And this was an important...
I remember we joked about that back then, like, who's calling for Strange Visitor to come back? And then it gets paid off. And
that's why it's like, you have to have that Casey Wieringo issue that brings back Strange Visitor, because otherwise she would come out of nowhere. She was introduced, for anyone who's like, who the hell's Strange Visitor? I mean, she was a character who was introduced in a 4-part fill-in arc by Ron and Randall Friends in late 99, right before the start of the Loeb Kelly era. And she was this childhood friend of Clark's. The readers knew that the spirit of Kismet was stored within her. But she develops these electricity powers, long story short, and dons Superman's old electric containment suit and becomes a superhero called Strange Visitor. But unless I'm mistaken, like, we never see her after that. She was like completely off the board. So June 2001, Prelude to War. So this is where the final pieces are kind of falling into place here. So we have Superman 171 by Jeph Loeb and Ed McGuinness. This issue, we've been talking about how Loeb employs narrators In most of his issues, this one, it's Emil Hamilton narrating. Now, after this point, Loeb's issues are going to feature not narrators, but rather excerpts from famous speeches throughout American history, which we'll talk about. But this one is narrated by Hamilton. And this is where Hamilton tracks down Pluto, now converted into Warworld. Superman goes to investigate. He's attacked by the Fatal Five. It turns out there are these hard light projections, defenses created by Warworld, which then self-destructs. And seemingly that's it for Warworld, but the reader sees that Warworld reforms and it will remain hidden and under the control, we learn, but the characters don't yet, by Brainiac 13 and the adult Lena Luthor. And on the note of Lena, I think, for me at least, the more interesting part of this issue is that Lex Luthor, President Lex, is visited in the White House by Lena, who gives him this warning of what's to come. What did you make of this?
I thought it was, I thought it was an interesting issue. It's an interesting start to it. The thing that really kind of jumped out at me is, first off, the fact that Lex sees Lena and right away his mind goes to the Matrix Supergirl.
Dude, that so jumped out at me because she has her back to him. And she's standing there and just this blonde figure. And I know his first thought is Supergirl. It's like, which, crazy. And it's like this Lex has a sexual history with, it's like, it's a whole thing. But yeah, that's what his mind went to. I thought it would have been better if he was like, Parasite?
Oh, that would have been good. That would have been good. Yeah, there's not a whole lot to say about this issue. The Fatal Five stuff, it's it was okay, but that's just mostly just like, the setup for Warworld being here. And to the point, I think the fact that this is the last issue that uses that traditional character narration really does set it apart from the rest of this event. Because after this, Loeb does use the presidential speeches. But the most interesting thing here is not only the fact that he mistakes Lena, his daughter, for Supergirl, who he had a sexual history with, but also the fact that, she tells him that there's, what all great presidents need is a great war. And, and this realization. And one of the things I really like about this, one of the things that, so this was, Smallville came out around the same time, I believe, right? This was 2001 when Smallville premiered.
Yeah.
So this was a really interesting time period for Lex in a lot of ways. Not only did he, and when I think of Lex Luthor, it is this era of Lex that I think of, that my mind goes to. And, when I've read stuff that before this, my impression of Lex going into this era was always that he was kind of one note. He feels almost like cartoonishly supervillainous in some points, like like messing with people and all this. But here in this run, I get a sense that there's a lot more dimension to his character. And I really liked that about it. So this one scene here, I've got this page up here now. It says, if, and it is a very large if, I believe what you're saying is true. All those people, they will have to die. And there is, and she does say, what are a few million lives in the universe is at stake? You, of all of them, understand that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. But there's that moment there where he has this moment of humanity. Is like, wait a minute, what are we actually talking about here? And I like that. I like that this Lex has some sort of a humanitarian side to him. I don't get the sense that he is a cackling supervillain. I get the sense that he is someone who really does believe he is doing the right thing.
I'm so happy you zeroed in on that moment, because that was more than anything what jumped out to me about that issue. And as I always say, I always look for the best in Lex, but from a storytelling standpoint, I do think it's more interesting when there is that humanity. And I think that moment that you cited is a great example, because we don't know it at the time reading this issue, but presumably what Lena is forewarning him of is the destruction of Topeka, Kansas at a minimum, right? And Lex does allow that to play out. Although once again, maybe being too fair to Lex, I say to myself, it's like, well, what could Lex have even stopped it? I mean, I don't know. Even if he had warned the heroes, I don't know that they would have been able to prevent that. I mean, maybe. So he does still allow that to play out. And I agree. I think certainly Lena is playing on, his desire to be quote unquote immortal, to be one of the greats and to have this war that he's able to guide the country through. But even with all of that, it did feel like a very real moment when he asks, do all those people have to die? Mm-hmm. And as I said when we did our President Lex episode, we don't get super political here, but as I'm rereading this story, I'm saying to myself, I think I've been so beaten down by the past decade of American politics where I see Lex in this issue and throughout the story, and I'm like, not so bad, not so bad. And I feel like if Imperiex were real and made his move in the real world today under our current leadership, I feel we would be doomed in a way that we wouldn't if Lex were real and guiding us through it.
Absolutely. So I was literally just finishing up listening to your episode with Bernie. I think I still have like 3 minutes left on it actually, but great episode, by the way. You guys always knock it out of the park. But one of the things you said in there that I think I commented this on Facebook that I loved is you talked about how the comparisons, you don't quite like the comparisons between Lex and Trump. And I am so with you on that because, honestly, first off, Lex is a much smarter guy. Let's just be honest about that. And also much smarter than certain South African billionaires that he's often being compared to as well. But also there is, like I said, in this era especially, he does have a humanitarian side. He does have a humanity about him that I don't think these other characters have. I mean, going back to the President Lex stuff, he divested from his company.
Yeah, I mean, look, and I won't dwell on this for anyone who's like, oh, no. Let me just say this. That apparent concern that Lex demonstrates in that scene with Lena, it seems like he cares whether people live or die. And my personal opinion, after what we've seen of our current president, I honestly cannot say the same. I truly don't think he cares whether people live or die, but I think Lex does. So there's that. So I just had that in my head as I was going through these stories. But that's the first part of this. Another core issue here, Adventures of Superman 593 by Joe Casey and Mike Wieringo. By the way, we've been beating up on Adventures of Superman a lot in these issues. It had the most changes in creative teams and sort of had different visions throughout, and it never felt as cohesive as the other titles did. And I don't say this to knock any of the previous creators like Immonen, Miller, DeMatteis, Miller, but if we had Joe Casey and Mike Wieringo on Adventures of Superman from the start of the Loeb Kelly era, I mean, I already love this run of comics, but I feel like that would have been like that last piece. You know what I mean?
Especially with that original premise that they were going with, that whole kind of man of the street vibe, because that's exactly what Casey's run really kind of shifted into after this crossover was done, which we talked about in that episode. And I'm with you. Like, Adventures was this really kind of weird book. I picked it up when it was part of a crossover, and then I picked up Casey's first issue, and it was like we talked about that. It was the end of this crossover, or the end of this Blaze and Satana story. DeMatteis, he does that metaphysical stuff really awesome. Anyone who hasn't, check out his Defenders work from Marvel back in the day, because it's chock full of that kind of stuff. But that book really just didn't really have an identity, I feel like.
Yeah, and it finally has it now. And look, better late than never. And for these 3 months, you've got all 4 books with their regular creative teams like firing on all cylinders. So it's really nice to see. And I'm glad that everyone was together for this big event. But this one, we have a test run of the new Suicide Squad that includes Plasmus, Shrapnel, and Chemo, and they're led by Manchester Black, and they contend with Superman. And after this, Superman confronts General Rock, Amanda Waller, and Lex, and basically says, like, I know what you're doing, and I'm keeping an eye on you guys. And there's also back and forth between Lois and Sam Lane. And if I'm not mistaken, I mean, I think this ends up being their last conversation before Sam's big sacrifice.
I believe so, yeah. Although I will say, normally I love Wieringo's art, but was it just me, or does Sam and this other general, are they drawn exactly alike? Because I thought it was Sam as I was reading it. I'm like, how is he in 2 places?
I will say, so General Frank Rock and Major Sam Lane, yeah, and not just in this issue. I think there are times where it's like a little tough differentiate. But, and obviously, you know, it doesn't help that they're, you know, men of a similar age in the military. Like they're not worlds apart in their characterization. But I guess not a ton stands out to me about this issue, but maybe more than anything else, and this ties back to our Action 775 episode and everything, it's kind of shocking to me how quickly they brought Manchester Black back. I mean, maybe it's not that, you know, that shocking, but, you know, it hasn't been that long. And now here he is being, you know, tapped by the government to run the Suicide Squad.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. I didn't realize that it had been so short, actually. Probably even when I was reading this, just because I was reading so many books at the time that things just kind of, like you said, this crossover was 3 months. It felt, my memory of it was that it was a lot longer, but I think that's just because of how many books there were and just how impactful it was. So yeah, Manchester Black coming back. I didn't realize it was so soon after, but I did love seeing him again. I mean, that, you know, 775, that made me really keen on Manchester Black as a character. I loved it when he popped up in the Rebirth stuff. I really liked that deep cut of bringing him back. And actually, when I think about it, I believe this may have been my first introduction to the Suicide Squad.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Not the most all-star of lineups, but
no, definitely not. So when I would get into them later and find out, I'm like, oh wow, they're actually they got a lot better choices than what they pull out here.
Yeah, but once again, important setup, because when we get deep into our Worlds at War, we'll have the Suicide Squad. Their key mission is to implement the Doomsday Protocol to free Doomsday from his prison in the Watchtower on the moon. So again, all of these issues really just kind of putting the final pieces into place. Then we have Man of Steel 115 by Schultz and Mahnke, and now things are heating up here. We have seemingly the entire population of Metropolis abducted. And it turns out it's for their own protection. They're placed on this space ark to protect them and keep them out of harm's way while the alien alliance occupies Metropolis. And Superman discovers who comprises this alliance. And he has this line. He's like, what hellish conspiracy is this? Because he stumbles upon Maxima, Massacre, and those were the two he had encountered. Oh, and Graven as well, who he encountered when they were fleeing from Imperiex in that earlier issue I had mentioned. They're also joined by Mongal now, and Starfire and Adam Strange. So strange bedfellows, indeed. And it's Adam Strange in particular who talks to Superman kind of on the side and brings him to one of the galaxies that Imperiex has destroyed. And he's like, look, like this is the threat that we're facing. This is also the moment I had referred to before where Maxim was like, I warned you about this. I warned you that Imperiex was coming. And you know, Lois really emerges as a leader among the humans on the ship here to kind of get everybody together and organized and all of that. And it ends with this big reveal that the leader of this alliance is none other than Darkseid, and you have Apocalypse arriving in our solar system. So really a key issue here. What did you make of this one?
Yeah, I thought, like I said before, when I was reading at the time, Schultz was definitely not my favorite of the writers. He was my least favorite of the bunch. So I wasn't very keen on Man of Steel. It was the first one I dropped, but going back and rereading this, I actually dug this a lot. I think the whole opening where they've got this, you know, they just wake up and they're in this completely alien situation, all in their PJs, was really effectively done. I love that, you know, Lois kind of steps up here as well, and how Clark also demonstrates, because I think sometimes Clark's intelligence is underwritten or underappreciated, but here he shows a good mind for strategy. Like he tells her, like, you know, this is your center point. This is how you have to kind of navigate around. He kind of teaches her how she's supposed to navigate this era. And I thought all of that was really well done. I did think it would have been cool to kind of, I know they probably didn't have time for this, but just the idea in general of this is a good test to see how well that secret identity works if he's there in his PJs and he doesn't have his glasses. But we don't really get any of that.
I know. I didn't remember the exact beats of this. And as I was starting to read it, I'm like, oh, is this going to be a plot point where he has to decide who he's going to present himself as? But yeah, it doesn't really delve into that territory. But yeah, what I liked about this, I liked the turn where typically being abducted by aliens would be what you need to overcome. But here it ends up being for their own benefit. And just this reaction, Clark's reaction to the so-called hellish conspiracy, because this is really, I think, like I said from the jump, the compromises that he has to make, the people that he has to work with where he typically wouldn't. You see that from this moment here. So I kind of like what that's tapping into. And yeah, his resourcefulness. I mean, there's a point where he knocks out one of the alien guards and dons his costume so he can sneak around the ship and whatnot. This was a really strong one. Look, this has been another kind of common refrain in all of these episodes we've been doing. The Schultz Man of Steel issues were never my favorite back in the day. I really, really enjoy them a lot more now. So I'm happy for that.
Yeah, this arc is making me want to go back and reread that whole run and just kind of see like how my opinion has changed of it.
Yeah, no, I encourage you to. I think you get more out of it. I mean, especially all the business working with Steel, creating the new Fortress of Solitude, like all this stuff with the Eradicator and reconciling the different versions of him. There's good stuff in there. The other thing too, as we're getting deeper into this and we're going to talk more, Imperiex is really going to make his move very shortly with the destruction of Topeka in the next issue here, Action Comics. This was one of the other things that I think always kind of held our Worlds at War back a little bit for me was I always just kind of felt like, well, Imperiex, there's not that much to him. He's just this unstoppable, destructive force that is hell-bent on wiping out this universe and initiating a new Big Bang to start over. And he's the natural order and all that. And to me, I always looked at him more as a plot device rather than a proper character. And I think I kind of always knocked the story for it. And now I look at it and I say to myself, well, no, I mean, I don't think I'm wrong in my assessment of Imperiex, but at the same time, I don't think that's a failing of the story. I think that's the purpose that he's there to serve. Imperiex as an entity is really there to be this vehicle to facilitate these battles, these alliances and whatnot. Like that's what the heart of the story is all about. And in defense of our Worlds at War, it does play with this idea. It comes up, I think in particular, Black Racer in an upcoming issue of Man of Steel. And we hear this from Imperiex himself when Superman confronts him. But this idea of Imperiex representing the natural order, like this is what's supposed to happen. Like this is his function in the universe, is to start over and wipe the slate clean. And what makes Superman think that this should be stopped? So I think it does kind of prompt some intriguing ideas. There's not a ton of time to really unpack the philosophical side of it, but I don't know. I think Imperiex serves important functions in a number of ways. And so I think the kind of the shortcomings that I've always attributed to Imperiex, I think I've kind of gotten over that.
Yeah, I think Imperiex, I get the sense that they were just kind of like sitting around at a Superman retreat and they're just like, wouldn't it be cool if we had Superman fight Galactus? And that's kind of what it feels like. Cause he's got like the same basic MO. Instead of eating, planets, he's here to destroy the universe, but it's basically the same thing. He's part of the natural order. He's this destructive force in the universe, but the universe needs him to exist. And that's the same role that Galactus plays in the Marvel universe. So I feel like that's kind of like that's as much as really Imperix's character is there, but it's not about Imperiex as a character. It is, like you said, it's about how does Superman specifically address this challenge, which is going to be different from the way that, the Fantastic Four or the Avengers will address it. I think that's really what's key here. And when we get to those later issues, which we'll talk about, especially, I also read ahead to the issue of each title following the finale. And the one that really stood out was actually the Man of Steel issue when he gets brought before this tribunal. And that really kind of like clicked everything together for me with this story. And I think it gave me a new appreciation for it. This isn't a story that you go into because you want to see a villain with complex motivations or anything like that. That's not what this story is trying to do. Imperiex is just basically a force of nature, and Superman has to deal with that.
Yeah, it's funny because, and I'll skip ahead a little bit too, but there's a point, I think it's at the beginning of Casualties of War, the Superman issue, when they're in the war room and Lex is kind of giving Superman his marching orders to effectively kill Imperiex. And Lex has this line, he's like, tell me you've never used your heat vision to stop a tidal wave, right? Or stop the tornado or things to that effect. And I guess the reason why this is so interesting to me, there's an issue of Man of Steel that we talked about in one of our earlier episodes. One of the most fascinating issues, I think, of the Schultz run, where I mean, we talked about it, so I'll try to go quickly here. But where you have this storm raging, and there are these islands, right, that have been developed on, but Aquaman kind of pushes Superman to allow the storm to take those islands because they were never meant to be tied down. They were meant to be these free-floating islands that can absorb the brunt of the storms and save the mainland. But developers built places there, and the islands were evacuated, so there was no question about a loss of life or anything like that. And Superman in that issue ultimately allows the property to be destroyed. He heeds Aquaman's advice and allows this storm to destroy the buildings so that the islands can serve their natural function. There's no kind of direct, explicit callback to that in these issues, but just kind of thematically, in terms of what we had experienced not too long ago in the books, I was like, oh, like that's really interesting. So like here, now, I mean, obviously the stakes are vastly higher. We're talking about the life of every being in the universe. So of course Superman would take action, but it was just kind of interesting, kind of coming on the heels of that.
Yeah. And I think that's just this whole idea. It's like, how does Superman deal with these? That's the age old question, right? How much is Superman supposed to intervene in the natural order of things? And also to Lex's point, I think he makes a good point there. Like, tell me you've never used I'm going to jump ahead too to that because I clocked that moment too. And this was something that I had a little bit of an issue with Superman in this because I get it. Like I'm a proponent of Superman not killing as well, but we're not talking about, killing Parasite or Lex Luthor. We are talking about this, this otherworldly being. And it was kind of the same thing I had when he fought Doomsday. It's just like, I don't think this is the time when you have to worry about that morality coming into play.
Yeah, no, but in fairness to Superman, I mean, in that scene with Lex, he says, like, I'm not having a moral debate with you. And Superman essentially says, like, I just don't think I can. Like, I can't, because the whole business is about cracking the Imperiex armor. And he's like, I don't think I can. And that's then when we have this turn with using the power of strange visitor. So yeah, I mean, like he objects, but his objection seems to be more practical, more about whether or not this can be achieved as opposed to like, no, I'm morally opposed, I won't do it. So yeah, we have that. So Action Comics 780 by Joe Kelly, and I've been calling him Kano in all of these issues, but when I interviewed Joe Kelly, I think he called him Kano. So I'll amend my.
I always called it Kano too.
Yeah,
I guess that's the Mortal Kombat history coming into play.
I guess in my head he'll always be Kano. But this is, like I was saying before, I think the first like real pivot point in this storyline where we have the arrival of Darkseid on Earth, the reveal that Lex has entered into this alliance with Darkseid. So there's already been this communication between them. And President Lex sends Superman away to Berlin to stop the attack by the general of Pakistan and his Imperial Guard. And so this brings Superman into conflict and contact once again with the general, and Superman questions why he's doing this. And he's like, because I can. Because you have not suffered enough to be who you are. And then we get the famous line that Superman will kneel before Zod. So obviously we're rereading this. We know where this is going. We know this is going to be the Zod for this era for a little while. But for Superman, this is the first instance of who this person actually is or claims to be. And it totally throws him because Superman executed the only Zod that he's ever known at the conclusion of the John Byrne run in that pocket universe. So it's very confusing and it throws him, and they're having this battle. And then in the midst of all of this, we see this object heading towards Earth as they're battling in space. And it was interesting to me that even Zod was like, well, let's just hit pause on this. We'll continue this another day. And this is the huge development. We get this essentially nuclear strike on Topeka, Kansas. And the issue ends with this massive double-page spread of Superman above watching just this massive catastrophic explosion. And it's really, really striking. Not to make light of it, but right before the strike, we get my pal, Vice President Pete Ross, with his one friggin' line of the entire event, I think, where he's like, sir, something's happening. And that I don't think we ever see him again. Or at least he doesn't speak, even if we do.
I don't think I clocked him again until afterwards when Clark is rebuilding the farmhouse.
Yeah.
So of all the issues of this Loeb Kelly run, the two that stand out the most to me are 775 and 780. Like this one was seared into my memory because I remember reading it at the time, and even me not being a big Superman at the time, but having watched Superman 2, knowing, just like not having read the story, but knowing the history of Zod in the post-crisis world, that moment when he says, he's pummeling him, "You've not suffered enough, you are living only for the day you will kneel before Zod." Like that, when I was reading that time, I remember being like, holy crap, what? And of course, we'll then get into all the, hullabaloo about how this is the Pokolistani Zod who was like raised in, some sort of a, dungeon type thing where it was like subjected to the suit is like, red solar energy or all this kind of stuff. And it's just like, this is a weird thing in the post-crisis era where it's like, we can't have any other Kryptonian. So if you're going to have Zod, he can't be Kryptonian Zod. He has to come from a pocket universe, or he has to be this guy who was influenced by the Zod from a pocket. It was all very kind of bizarre. Just like, let them have Zod.
Yeah. While we're on this Zod, while we're here. So what we find out over the course of many issues written by Joe Kelly after Our Worlds at War, what we find out is that this version of Zod is the son of Russian cosmonauts. But interestingly, people will hear this in a few weeks when I play my interview with Joe Kelly. Kelly's idea, the initial plan was for Zod to be Clark's brother, his Kryptonian brother. But DC would not allow that and hence had to pivot. But that was kind of the original idea and then how it played out. But he'll continue to be a player in these stories here that we're talking about. But yeah, man, that nuclear strike. I mean, obviously the Zod stuff it really stands out, but that nuclear strike, I mean, it's, it was something, like that's the thing. I mean, they went hard with this story.
They went very hard with the story and just like also really put Superman through the emotional ringer as well through it in a lot of different ways, both as Superman and as Clark. We mentioned, Sam, obviously his sacrifice, but also you have, the moral compunctions, having to work with Lex, all this kind of stuff that, keeps popping in and out throughout here. And then which we'll talk about too, what happens to Jonathan and Martha, or what we believe happens to them, we should say. But I just love the fact that Superman keeps bringing up the fact that Zod broke his jaw. Like, I love that this is just something that is just, it gets in his craw, right? That's just like this is the little human elements that Joe Kelly does a great job of bringing out. Right. And where he does this thing where Superman is this aspirational figure, like you talked about before in his writing, but there are still these brief little moments of humanity that come through and they bring him back down to earth. And I think it's an amazingly delicate balancing act that Kelly executes.
100%. 100%. By the way, just on the note of the alliance between Lex and Darkseid, it's not in this issue. It's one of the upcoming action issues, but there's a line where someone says that Lex knows how to play Darkseid.
Mm-hmm.
That make you think of anything?
Yeah, absolutely. Except in this case, I actually believe it.
Yeah, right.
This is one of the things I looked is that he's not fazed by Darkseid. Like, this is the ultimate personification of evil. And then, Lex is just like, I don't give a crap who you are. He's not even fazed by Darkseid. Like, I think that is amazing, right? And like when Darkseid calls him, he's the insect in charge. Like, that's President Insect to you, President Luthor, if we're going into business together.
But I think Darkseid emerging as an ally here, right, like instantly conveys to the reader like how high the stakes are and what an existential threat Imperiex is. Like, Imperiex is enough of a threat that Darkseid would align himself with Earth and these other alien planets. So it's just, again, I think it really, really conveys a lot. Oh, and on the note of the planets, we didn't talk about this, but kind of the trade dress on the covers of all of the Our Worlds at War books. We have the three planets. We have Earth, Apocalypse, and Warworld. And of course, Warworld won't really enter the picture until we're deep into it, but we have those three planets on the cover of all of these Our Worlds at War issues to kind of convey the forces at play.
While we're on that, and this is just something I was thinking about as I was reading this story, but what do you think of the title of this event, Our Worlds at War? I don't know. I've always felt like it feels it doesn't feel like it has the same punch as something like, you know, any of the different crisis events.
I'm with you. Yeah, I mean, I don't, like, off the top of my head, I don't know what I would have called it, but yeah, Our Worlds at War. I mean, it's not, you know, it's not like
accurate.
It works. Yeah, it's not inaccurate,
Yeah.
but yeah, I know Our World. I also don't know that it like rolls off the tongue naturally.
Yeah. I think it's the our part that is really throwing me off on it. Like Our Worlds at War. It makes it feel somewhat smaller in scale than it really is.
Yeah, you know, if it had just been Worlds at War, because it's like that would have been better. Because it's like we're used to the notion of World War.
Mm-hmm.
And so this would have just been more of a play on that. Worlds at War. The hour is what I would, I'm with you. Yeah. Well,
and also it would, there's also precedent because, you know, Morrison's last JLA arc was World War III. So.
Yes. Yeah, I know. My love of the TV series Smallville is well documented, and there's one Smallville podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring great insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode, and the podcast will continue with more great Smallville and Superman talk even after their series coverage concludes. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner, including Arrow, Star Wars, and more. We all love the big-budget superhero films, but the world of independent cinema remains a place of unbridled creative freedom and entrepreneurial spirit. Whether you're an independent filmmaker yourself or you just love movies, don't miss these New Jersey film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, and Round Reel in Bloomfield. Submission information for filmmakers can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and much more. We're now in July 2001, All Out War, the second major act of Our Worlds at War. And we start off with Superman 172 by Loeb and McGuinness, and this is the aftermath of the Topeka blast. By the way, the destruction of Topeka, correct me if I'm wrong, like it's caused by the crash landing of the Imperiex probe, correct?
I believe so, because that's what isn't that what the whole thing in the first Supergirl stuff is dealing with that?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, because it's not like a missile or a bomb per se. My understanding is it's the impact of the strike of the probe. We'll get a little bit more information in the JLA Our Worlds at War one shot, but essentially these Imperiex probes land in the middle of each continent and Atlantis, near Atlantis as well. And they're going to create these hollower machines that will continue to expand and then connect and rip the planet apart. So that's what this business with the probes is about. But in the Superman issue, we get the aftermath of the destruction of Topeka, and there's this big double page spread of Superman just kind of taking it in, and it just like the weight and the horror of it, really weighs on him. I mean, I would say the abduction of Metropolis was certainly off-putting, but I think we're now really at the point, and certainly the Zod reveal, he's kind of been knocked around a little bit so far, but I feel like taking this in is really the first like really big domino to kind of fall that leads to the state that we see him in later in the story. And there's this great scene here where there's this little boy calling for help, and Superman grabs him, and the boy says he's scared, and Superman says, "I'm scared too." And he's like, "I didn't think you get scared." And he's like, "Well, I'll tell you what, if you'll be brave, I'll be brave too." And the reason I love that, I mean, it's great to see him interacting with the child and being able to offer some sort of comfort. But, I always talk about being a dad and kind of these parallels that I see. And that's something that I do a lot with my son, where it's like, I always try to, it's like on the one hand, you don't want to like dump your problems on your kids, but like, I will tell him like, especially if he's having a hard time with something, if he's angry, he's fussy, he's frustrated, he's upset that he lost, like whatever it is, I'm always telling him, it's like, it's okay. Like, I know what that feels like. Like, I feel that way too sometimes, like, just to kind of say like, hey, it's okay. So that scene just kind of resonated in and of itself. And then kind of, especially thinking about it, from this perspective. So that was really a standout.
Yeah, I clocked that too. It, what reminds me of a lot is The Amazing Spider-Man, the first Andrew Garfield movie.
Yes.
He rescues the boy from the car. That's hands down, probably one of my favorite scene in that movie. And this is a very kind of similar idea. So this story, and I don't think I appreciated this at the time I read it, but now rereading it, I really appreciated it, just how much we see Clark go through in this story. And just like, it's just like, and this is what, this kind of war type of situation is like. It is just relentless. And it's just like, there's thing after thing after thing after thing. And it's just like relentless hammering until you feel you can't deal with it anymore. And Superman has moments like that in this story. And first off, it's like, I like that about the character. I like when you see him have to struggle and have to rise above it. And I think that's what makes him such an aspirational character, because everyone talks about how, and people who don't really know the character as well, they talk about how, well, everything's easy for him. And it's like, well, no, it's not. Yeah, bullets bounce off of him, but that's not what bothers him. It's what happens when the bullet bounces off of him and hits an innocent bystander. That's what he's more scared of. And this is a great example of how you challenge Superman as a character. It's not about the big alien threat that's there, obviously, but it's not about having to punch some alien threat into submission. It's about, how does he deal with how that threat affects other people around him? And this fact that he was there, right, in the action issue, he saw that come through. And whatever it was, maybe it was that he was, and I love that the story doesn't really tell you what to think about it, right? But it leaves it there as just kind of an open door where you can think like, well, could he have stopped that probe? Like, if he wasn't so, had such tunnel vision about from the Zod reveal, if he was bet more on his game. And I think it's, and I never even thought about this. And I think it's really cool that maybe that might have been good if they had some sort of interior narration about it, about him thinking, like, questioning whether or not he could have stopped it somehow. But that just came to me now thinking about that, is like, that adds a whole new dimension to this 2-page spread and the boy and all that, because you got to be thinking, he was there, he saw it coming. He's got to be thinking, could I have stopped it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a very powerful question. And then for him and the audience, like, hanging over all of this, and we'll get at least some payoff at the end of this issue, but it's like, we're talking about Kansas, right? So of course, inherently, we're wondering, what is the state of Smallville? Are the Kents okay? And when the soldiers roll into town, Superman asks them if they've heard anything, but they don't know yet. But there is a line from one of the soldiers who's like, talking about being deployed to this area, to Ground Zero, and saying like, oh yeah, President Luthor really seems on top of it. And it's like, yes, of course, because he's had this advanced knowledge of what's to happen. There's another moment coming up in, I think it's in the JLA issue that's right after this, where Lex is being briefed. And he's like, oh, I know about that. And I think it's General Rock is like, we just got this. How do you know?
Yeah. So also about the Lex thing too, I wonder, there's also a question of like, how much did he actually know? Because Lena obviously tells him people are going to die. Something's going to happen. And when the strike happens on Kansas, he says he seems to know that something was going to happen. But there's also that question too. And if he did know something, how much did he know? And I think this is also, there's a historical parallel to this, because the longstanding conspiracy theory is that FDR had some inkling about Pearl Harbor. When you look into the history of it, it's actually not that cut and dry. It's because the Japanese were using code. There was like, they intercepted something, but it wasn't able to be translated in time. And even still, I think the message was really kind of vague. So there is, putting that to bed, but there is that, precedent there in that idea, at least, that, like, he knew something was going to happen. So, or also with, taking it back to 9/11 too, that whole report that came out during the commission, bin Laden determined to attack the US. Okay, there's something in the works, but you don't know where, you don't know when. So would it have made a difference if he had told the Justice League or something like that? So that's another question that adds another dimension to it. And that's what I like about this story, is that there are these little tiny dimensions that you probably don't think about on the first read, but they do kind of come through little bits through on rereads.
No, it's true. Yeah, because it's always kind of nebulous in the story about like exactly what Lena told him. So yeah, we don't know exactly what he knew, how specifically he knew how things were going to play out, or what reason he was given, or how specific the reason he was given for why things had to play out that way. Like we don't totally know. So, but I'm okay kind of living in the ambiguity of some of that, because I do think it makes it interesting. But
it does. It makes for conversations like this too.
Yeah, absolutely. So in this issue, Superman battles the Imperiex probe that landed, and he uses the skills that Mongol had imparted to him. He uses his heat vision and super breath at the same time and cracks the armor, and it creates this huge explosion. He's able to contain it, I think, by forcing the probe underground. But this is important information in terms of how these Imperiex probes work and what the kind of cost is if you are able to penetrate that armor. But other than the moment with the boy, I think far and away the highlight of this issue is when he finally makes his way to the farm and it's just demolished and Jonathan and Martha aren't there. And he's literally picking up the pieces and he just lets out this scream, this yell. It's so loud. I loved this touch. It's so loud that Supergirl arrives and it blows her ears out. Like she can't hear him for a few panels. And this is where we get the Superman the movie moment where he says, I have all this power and I couldn't save them. And you talk about these dominoes falling, the catastrophic loss of life on a large scale, but now very specifically, very personally, he doesn't know where his parents are, if they're okay. And given what he's already seen, it doesn't look good for their fate. So, I mean, and it's like, you just think about like, that's, I guess, as I was rereading this, I just kept thinking of like all this stuff that's like piling up on this guy issue after issue. It's really something.
Well, also it's the fact that Linda Danvers is there. So like, I don't know. I mean, obviously he had a relationship with the Matrix Supergirl, but this is, this is at the point when Matrix and Linda had been split off and Linda now becomes the new Supergirl. So I don't know what, if any, relationship he has with Linda Danvers, but my impression, and at least what I kind of hope it was, because I think it makes for a more interesting point in the story that I'm going to get to, is that he doesn't have much of a relationship with her, does he? So the fact that he's gone through all this and he just arrives at his childhood home, it is demolished. He's like, all of this stuff is just beating him down. And then it looks like his parents are dead too. And he lets out this primal scream. And then the only one there to comfort him is this woman that he barely knows. And he hugs her. And, McGuinness's art is amazing in this issue. Like, everyone thinks about McGuinness. They think about him like the big action scenes, the big muscles. But he does amazing work with the facial expressions in this issue. Like right from the start, when Superman is flying towards Kansas, like the pain, you can see the pain on his face. When he sees Imperiex, you can see the anger on his face. The torment when the realization of just like what this could possibly mean. Like there's not a lot of words in this page, but he just conveys so much through the art, the shaking, the line shaking around him, and then the look on Supergirl's face when Superman hugs her makes it look like she had no idea. She does not have that relationship with him. So the fact that he's gone through what could possibly be the worst tragedy in his life, and the only one who can be there for him in this moment is someone he doesn't even really know. It just adds to the tragedy.
No, it's a great point. And I think another argument for why there's a place for Jonathan and Martha, because then you can have a development like this and, you really feel those personal stakes. And yeah, like this sense of isolation. That's a great observation about how this is a version of Supergirl. He doesn't have, I mean, hell, even the Matrix version, they're only so close, right? But at least there's more there. But yeah, this is the version of Supergirl he doesn't have that personal connection to. Lois is off-world on the space arc. Now he can't find his parents. I mean, it's really this kind of growing sense of isolation. But yeah, and I agree about McGuinness. It's fantastic. And he also does the final pages of the World's Finest one shot that wraps everything up, where you have Lois and Clark at the farm, and I think he's holding the mailbox, and he's like, "We won, Lois, right? We won." And yeah, no, I thank you for saying that, because we think of him with the action and all of that, but these quieter emotional moments he nails as well.
And the the spare costume.
Yes.
Oh God, that killed me. Like even when it looks like she's not, even when it looks like she might be dead, she's still looking out for him, right? He's still her little boy. Like that's just that kills me.
Yeah. And like we were saying before, from this point forward, Loeb is not using his typical narrator device, but rather excerpts from famous speeches. And this one features excerpts from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address.
Yes. Yeah.
And the JLA special that follows, that's also written by Jeph Loeb and drawn by Ron Garney. That one, you mentioned FDR, that features his speech about Pearl Harbor.
Right. Before we get to the JLA one, I just wanted to quickly say one more thing about the Kents here in this issue. Now, I'm not saying I want the Kents to be dead, right? I have come around on this idea, and I do think I've come around from listening to your show and everything. I used to think that there's value in the Superman the movie moment, right? You know, all that power, and I couldn't even save him when he dies of a heart attack. But, you know, and that works in the context of like one movie. But for when you're talking longer serial storytelling, I think you guys are right. I've come around to the idea that having the Kents there is very valuable. Like we were talking about with 775, that moment when he's talking to Clark about, you know, he's trying to give him counsel and all that. So I'm not saying I want the Kents to be dead, but at the same time, does the fact that, spoilers for a crossover that's, you know, over 20 years old, does the fact the Kents both turn up to be alive at the end, does that undercut this moment, do you think?
That's a fair question. I mean, ultimately for me, no. And it's, you know, it's not like, oh, he finds them easily and they're fine. I know he finds Martha in the first Superman issue after the crossover at a shelter or something. It takes a little bit longer to find Pa, and then Pa seemingly has mental deterioration. We actually find out that's caused by Manchester Black. We do get that revelation later on. But so, you know, again, I think it takes a while for the full reunion, and then it seems like Pa's really struggling. So it's like, you know, there's enough time where it feels like there's a cost that I'm like, okay, this wasn't like so neat and tidy. So I'm okay with it. But I think that's a fair question.
Yeah. I don't know where I land on it, honestly, because I don't want the Kents dead, but at the same time, there is so much put on this moment. But I guess also too, that also reflects the fog of war, right? Because you don't know what happens. And even if they do turn up, which they do turn up alive in the end, there is still that uncertainty throughout the whole thing. So I think there is something to be said that there is a point you can make that maybe it doesn't really matter if they're alive or dead. It's just more the emotions he goes through at the time.
Yeah, I agree. And I give them a lot of credit because Our Worlds at War proper ends with them still MIA. So yes, it's the immediate aftermath issue where we find Martha, but they leave this story with that question still hanging over everything, where it would have been really easy to kind of give him that bit of peace or peace of mind. So yeah, no, I appreciate
And Young
that.
Justice as well. They're still missing at the end too.
Yeah, for sure. The JLA one shot, you know, like I said, we get some important information here about the probes, where they've landed, kind of what the goal is. But I would say the thrust of this one shot, we see the JLA battling these probes. Wonder Woman pierces one of the probes in space and is caught in the blast, and she's severely injured. And Superman brings her to the paradox, I think is what they call them. And then the other key development here is that Aquaman similarly battles one of these probes and pierces his armor and is seemingly killed in action, though no body is recovered. And you know, this part was not clear to me from the JLA one shot, but it becomes clear by the World's Finest one shot that Tempest used his magic to move Atlantis, but they can't find it.
Okay, it wasn't just me then, because I was also confused by that, and I read this twice.
No, I mean, because it's like before Arthur goes to fight, he does tell Tempest, he's like, if I go down, you know what to do, or something to that effect. But when you read it, it really seems like both Aquaman and Atlantis are caught in this blast and seemingly vaporized. Like that was kind of, because I didn't remember exactly how this played out. And I came away from the JLA one shot. I'm like, oh, like, I wonder how they bring Atlantis back. But yeah, then you find out that Garth had moved it with his magic. So no, I don't think that was clear from the JLA issue.
That the opening stuff with the World War II and the U.S. alliances and all that hits really differently now.
Yes. Again, I'm going to break my rule here in addressing something, but reading these speeches that Loeb uses, it's funny because I remember this, the last time that I reread Our Worlds at War for episode 3 of Digging for Kryptonite, I kind of just skipped those. I skipped those captions when I was reading the issues because I guess I didn't feel like it really added much. I don't feel that way now. I really do kind of like the way they're used. Now, if it were totally up to me, would I have rather Loeb continued the narrator device that he had employed previously? Yes, I think I would have enjoyed that even more. But I appreciate the role that these speeches play, and I guess kind of hearing from Lincoln and FDR and Kennedy's inaugural, which is one of the upcoming ones, it just feels so removed from where we are now, and it like kind of broke my heart a little bit. It's like if you were to play a current speech, they're eating the dogs. It's like, what would it be?
Imperiex is not sending us his best probes. They're killers, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good probes.
I was thinking more like, he sent me probes, big probes, strong probes, tears in their eyes. They said, "Sir, we love Earth." I said, "We love Imperiex, but you can't probe me. You can probe JD. He loves it." All right, I got that out of my system.
I have a great relationship with Darkseid. Darkseid and I, we went through so much together. The whole apocalypse hoax.
Yes. Well, that's the thing. If Imperiex were real, we would be told for weeks that Imperiex isn't real and that it's a hoax or whatnot. Then we would be told that who is the only person who can deal with Imperiex, and then we'd all be dead. And that's pretty much how that would play out.
Well, on a serious note, and about the presidential narrations here, I wonder, in the context of Luther being president here, there are two ways you could look at it, honestly, and I think both of them are valid. You can look at it as, wow, look at how terrible Luther is a president. We got this guy as president during the biggest crisis the world has ever faced since the final night, I guess, or something else, or whatever. But you could also look at it and look at what we have to deal with. Look at the guy we have in charge. But it can also be looked at in the context of Luther is also one of these great presidents who is leading us to victory or helping us live through this. And I think both views are valid.
Yeah, and it's so hard for me to separate out like Lex's actual merits versus, just like I said, how I've kind of been beaten down and my expectations are so low, or the bar is so low. But no, I mean, like like any president in a wartime situation, but specifically Lex here, I mean, like the choices that he's faced with, like these hard decisions, these unseemly alliances, but even just beyond that, just being able to endure the unrelenting pace and cacophony of all of this. Like, we see the toll it takes on Superman. Now, yes, for Superman, there's a massive physical component that Lex is dealing with, but still, like, you see the toll that wartime takes on Superman, and Lex is able to weather that. So yeah, there's shady business with Darkseid and this knowledge that he had that he didn't act on, but he's still able to kind of steer the world through this. So yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for that. And there's something to be said for his ruthlessness, like the qualities that can make him a bad guy. I think in a situation like this might have actually been his saving grace.
Mm-hmm. And also too, like, so Aquaman in this issue, and I wasn't sure if this was just this issue, but then I listened to your conversation on another episode talking about, I think it was with Bernie, and you were talking about Aquaman in there, and dude seems to have a pretty big chip on his shoulder in these issues with Superman, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Like, and also when he says, like, where the hell is Batman and Superman? I'm like, what's Batman gonna do in outer space, man?
Yeah, like I said, man, like Arthur really cruising for bruising in a lot of these. I mean, I'm still sad that he seemingly met his end. We know he'll be back in Joe Kelly's Obsidian Age arc in his JLA run, but Yeah, I know. It's a chip on her shoulder, I think, is a perfect way to put it. So yeah, this JLA one shot, like very action packed, JLA battling, Wonder Woman injured, Aquaman seemingly killed, Atlantis MIA.
Well, this line from Arthur that really I wrote down, right? Remind Superman the oceans cover 3/4 of the planet. It's like, dude, what did Superman do to you?
I know. It's like stuff I'm like, all right, man, we get it. we get
You're
it.
edgy.
So this issue of Adventures of Superman 594, of course, by Casey and Wieringo, this is the Doomsday Protocol. So not unlike other Joe Casey issues, I like this. He plays with time where you see this tense confrontation that Superman's having with Lex in the past, juxtaposed throughout with what's going on in the present. So I kind of like the way it played out. But essentially, the government has enacted this Doomsday Protocol. They send the Suicide Squad, which now includes John Henry Irons, Steel. He had been arrested by the DEO in a prior issue of Man of Steel for his involvement with the Citizens Army for the Economic Liberation of Suicide Slum. And I guess this, although I was going to say, in exchange for his freedom, he joined but he does have a line to Superman where he's like, I wasn't coerced. I chose to do this. We never see that backstory. Like that all happens off panel, unless I totally missed something. But in any event, the Suicide Squad off panel has made it to the JLA Watchtower, and they've freed Doomsday from his prison there. Now, if I'm not mistaken, this is picking up a thread from the Dan Jurgens prestige format miniseries, The Doomsday Wars, which I don't know if you ever read, but that ended with, I think Brainiac had taken control over Doomsday's body, and they ended up containing Doomsday by trapping him in the JLA's teleporter transport system. So like he's constantly being broken apart and reformed. And so he's like never fully intact. He's like spread out across the transporters continually.
Yeah, that is triggering a vague memory here. So I think I did at least read a summary of that at some point, because that sounds familiar.
Yeah, but so you have Superman arguing with Lex about the viability of this plan. You have Superman finding a very severely injured John Henry Irons on the moon. Mongol is dead. It seems like Doomsday tore through the Suicide Squad. I liked John Henry talking to Superman about Doomsday. He's like I never realized. I'm paraphrasing, but like what a force of nature, like just how ferocious Doomsday was, right? Because he had never been face to face in that way. So I like that. And then we find out Manchester Black was able to, I guess, do some sort of mental maneuvering with Doomsday, where he's able to make Imperiex the trigger for Doomsday and the object of his ire and destructive force. And this leads to Superman and Doomsday fighting side by side against these probes in space. And the cover of this is their two fists together, and it says Superman and Doomsday, not versus. So
love that cover. Yeah.
You talk about unlikely allies. That's about as unlikely as it gets.
Yeah. Now, most of this, I did like that stuff with Lex, and I did like the stuff with Steel. Always a treat to see Manchester Black. But I don't know, the Doomsday thing in here, it felt like between this and the Batman issue from Our World's, the one shot, it felt like they were building up Doomsday to be something a little bit more, and then it's just he's gone after this. So and it felt like to me that they're just kind of using Doomsday as a shorthand to show like, look how powerful Imperiex is. He can kill Doomsday.
Yeah, I mean, so Doomsday is seemingly vaporized towards the end of this issue. We'll find out he's still intact, and Luthor's got him, because then there's that, which we'll talk about in our bonus episode, but that Superman issue that ties into Joker's Last Laugh, where Doomsday is infected, and then at the end of it, Lex gives Doomsday to Darkseid. Like that was part of their deal, and then Darkseid will later use Doomsday to create his army of Doomsdays who appear in the Supergirl arc of Superman Batman. So like this continues, but yeah, for the moment, it seems like Doomsday's been defeated.
I remember that Doomsday army. I wasn't aware that went all the way back to here.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of mixed on this. It makes sense that given the threat they face in the form of Imperiex, that nothing would really be off the table. And in fairness to Lex, I really, this whole run of episodes has really just become like a defense of Lex Luthor as president. But it's like, in his defense,
forget Justice for Peace Ross, Justice for Lex Luthor.
Who would have thought it? But it's not like they just free him and throw him at Imperiex. Like, I think the fact that you have Manchester's mental manipulation, that it's like, okay, Doomsday is at least being pointed at Imperiex and directed, alleviates a little bit. And then I guess what I really did like was Superman's narration in the margins. Joe Casey really likes that device of using either dialogue or narration in the margins, but where Superman equates the war that he's in the midst of now with really the only other war he's ever known, which was his first battle with Doomsday. So I liked that kind of connection point that Superman drew, again, as he's side by side with Doomsday in this incredibly unlikely scenario. And then, Doomsday is seemingly vaporized. Imperiex directs his blast at Superman, but he's transported away and he arrives unconscious at Darkseid's doorstep on Apocalypse, which will lead us into the next issue. But we also do get dialogue between Imperiex and Superman. I think it's in this issue where Imperiex says something to the effect of like, you caught my attention, which is more than, most in eons, or like something to that effect. So I get a little bit of an exchange there, but I mean, like, this was an interesting one to kind of see Doomsday in the mix in this way.
Yeah. One of the things I do like too is with, to your point about using the margins in that way is, Casey really lets Wieringo's art breathe in this issue. So, Wieringo's always on fire, but it looks amazing. So, my criticisms about the use of Doomsday here aside, like, it is a beautiful issue to look at.
For sure. So then we have Man of Steel 116 by a regular team of Schultz and Mahnke. And this one too bounces around in time a little bit. This opens though with what I would argue is one of the most moving, emotionally resonant beats of our World at War, as Superman is pleading with Black Racer not to take Steel. He's like, you can't have him. He's too important. I love this.
I'm like, I just realized this now, but and I don't know if he goes through all five, but is he going through the 5 stages of grief? Because we see like this denial right at first, and then goes straight into anger. And I can't recall if I wasn't thinking about this at the time, but I do wonder if he has him go through all 5 stages of grief in this issue. Oh,
that's a good question. I'd have to go back and look at it again. If that is the case, it didn't dawn on me as I was rereading it, but I would take another look at that. But yeah, I mean, essentially we kind of go back in time and we see Superman's arrival on Apocalypse after that skirmish with Imperiex. And we find out Darkseid has created this armor, the Entropy Aegis. I believe that's how you pronounce it, unless you know otherwise.
I read it as Aegis, but Entropy Aegis also seems like it could work.
I did do Google pronunciation. If I believe it was Aegis, but yeah, quite a name here for this armor that Darkseid has created that was made from the Imperiex armor combined with Apocalypse technology. And he wants Superman to wear this, but Superman turns him down. Now, later on, a resurrected John Henry Irons will don that. But in the moment, Superman says no. I think probably correctly surmising that anything that benefits Darkseid, is not a good thing. so he turns it down.
A note on the design of the Aegis armor is just, I don't know what you were thinking back, if you remember back what you were thinking when you first saw this, but my first thought when I saw this, like, oh, Steel's going to wear that. It's got his symbol right on the chest.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't, honestly, that I don't remember. I don't know if I was thinking that far ahead.
That was rereading this. That stood out to me. It's just like, I feel like, you could have done a little bit more to make the symbol a little bit less distinctive for Steel to kind of, bury the lead a little bit.
Yeah, that's probably fair. And then, so while this is going on, we've cut back to the moon where Steel lies dying, and he learns of the continued existence of Warworld.
Are we sure that he did? I'm not sure.
Yeah, because then he's like spelling out Warworld with his blood as he dies. And
right.
And also, not to nitpick, but it's like Superman can't figure out what message he was trying to convey. He wrote a good part of War. I mean, come on, man.
And then the first half of the O. I mean, like, doesn't take the world's greatest detective to crack that, especially after what you saw in Pluto.
Yeah. But in any event, this pleading with Black Racer, and this is what I was not alluding to, what I was talking about earlier, where Black Racer has this whole bit about Superman and Imperiex, and it's like, why do you even think you should stop Imperiex? Like, this is a force of nature, like this is his function, and all of that. And then the turn comes at the very end where, it seems Black Racer has a flash of his own humanity, because there is a human man. I think he's like a Vietnam vet who Black Racer inhabits. And so he has some sort of
flash, one shot goes into detail with that.
Gotcha. So he seems to have this flash of memory of the human part of himself and decides to spare John Henry Irons, which we'll see play out later. But just that Superman's desperation and pleading with death, essentially, and being told no. And again, another one of these dominoes falling, these compromises, having to fight alongside the beast that killed him. And then his friend and ally, John Henry Irons, falling, not being able to do anything. Like, it really, again, piling up here. Okay. So Action 781. So this is where we have, like I said, these kind of pivot points in the story. And in this one, we have Wonder Woman. At first, it seems like it's Diana. You find out it's Hippolyta who took Diana's place, who is killed in action against one of these probes defending the space ark. And you also have Lois's father, Major Sam Lane, who sacrifices himself. He detonates like a nuclear core within a tank that he's manning.
Yeah, something like that.
To defeat one of the probes that's attacking Washington, D.C. So we have the White House in particular. So we have these two big deaths, big sacrifices. But what stands out the most to me in this is just the state that Superman's in. Throughout the issue, he's like, I feel like I'm forgetting something. And there's this buzzing. And he doesn't know what it is. But it's his earpiece, right? Like it's Lois calling for him. Is that your understanding? Like, that's the buzzing throughout, is the earpiece?
That's what my thinking is too. Yeah. And it's just, looping on the tragedy here of, because like we talked about with the Superman issue, that tragedy that when he experiences the loss of his parents and the only one there to comfort him is this woman he barely knows. Here, Lois loses her dad and the only one to comfort her is Lex Luthor. And the kicker is he actually does a good job.
Like, that is so striking to me. And we keep talking about this humanity in the character, and I'm saying to myself, like, I'm trying to think about all the different angles here, and it's like, oh, is there some sort of underhanded motivation that we're missing? But I mean, I don't know, because she says, she collapses and he's holding her, and she says, like, why didn't he come? Why didn't Superman come? Because she's, whether it's through the earpiece and or just speaking to him, he has super hearing, right? Like, she's calling for him to come to save her dad, and he doesn't. And she says to Lex, like, why didn't he come? And it would have been the easiest thing in the world for Lex to say any of the things that you might expect him to say against Superman. But he says, like, I'm sure he had a good reason. He would do anything for you. And I really can't think of any other angle other than I think he truly does care for Lois. I mean, we already talked about this, but the ending battle storyline that comes down the road a bit, that great scene between Superman and Lex, when Lex knows Clark's secret at this point, and he's talking about who he loves. And Lex is like, I love myself first and foremost. I love Lena, despite what you believe. And then for the third one, he unveils the statue of Lois. And I don't know, especially in conjunction with this moment that we're talking about here, it's like, I think he does genuinely care for her and doesn't want to hurt her and wants to offer some comfort in that moment.
Yeah. I haven't read that ending battle storyline, so I'm not. So I don't know what the whole context is. Statue feels like a bit much,
a little bit much.
but no, I agree with you. Like, there's also, I recall that the wedding special, right, when he was watching like the wedding from afar, and he comments on, kind of, I think it's vague memory, but I think he comments on, like, this respect he has for Lois and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I think he does. I think he does care for her. I think he does respect her. And just, yeah, this would have been a perfect point for Lex to be like, well, obviously Superman doesn't care for the little people or something like that. Or or something like that. But instead he says, when she says, I'm going to read this verbatim, I sure he would have, unless something insurmountable was in his way. He would do anything for you. But sometimes you find yourself caught up in circumstances where you can't follow your heart, even when you want to. Duty sometimes comes first. Duty to country, to work, honor. You work so very hard to do what you think is right. And sometimes, as a result, the people who mean the most slip through your fingers. I don't know why Superman didn't come, Lois, but I can tell you this. His heart is breaking for it. And it's just like, damn.
Yeah. No, I mean, I love this moment. Look, I think this started with the campaign for the presidency, and it continues through here, where the writers continually subvert our expectations of what you would expect or think Lex to do. And I think this is a perfect example of it. Like, he offers genuine comfort to Lois in her moment of need. But yeah, I mean, like, this is really the issue where you see how disoriented Superman is. He's not answering any of the calls. He's not responding to the voices in the earpiece. And he's just really kind of lost. And, it was kind of interesting that the moment where, or I guess the first instance where he really kind of snaps out of it, Lois is calling for him, but that's not what snaps him out of it and what registers. It's Wonder Woman. That's who he goes to, which I just thought, I'm not throwing shade on our Man of Steel, but it was just kind of interesting, especially after the whole Wonder Woman 1000 Years in Valhalla issue. And I mean, I can't remember in Kelly's post Our Worlds at War action issues, if that's because I know Lois there is resentment over Clark's inability to save her father. Like, that is, they do deal with that, but I'm not sure if there's any instance where she explicitly says, like, you were there for her. I mean, he's still not there in time to save Hippolyta, but the fact that's the situation that he goes to, I don't know that that's ever specifically brought up.
I do. Yeah, I don't know about that specifically, but I do think there wasn't also some resentment when we were doing the Casey issues following Our Worlds at War too.
Yeah.
But also this last page, right? When Superman, well, first he comes in right after Lex gives her this speech about how I knew he could be here if he would. And then he just kind of walks in and he doesn't know what to say. And that's such a big contrast from what Lex just said. And it's like, the only thing he can say is, I'm so sorry. And his hands are shaking. And I thought I'd lost everything before, but I've never been more frightened in my life. And what he says to Lex here, I thought I knew how to fight a war. I was wrong. Lex, everything between us aside, can you stop this? Can you stop this death? He says, I believe I can. You won't like it, though it will require sacrifice. I know how to sacrifice, as he's watching Lois with his x-ray vision through the wall as she's pounding the wall in torment. And he says, believe me, tell me what to do, Mr. President. Whatever it takes to win this, I'm yours. Man.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a powerful moment. I mean, just the notion of Superman giving himself over to Lex and his leadership, and just this acknowledgement of, I don't know how to fight a war, which is true. Like, that's, I think, one of the things about the storyline that I think, I don't know, sometimes maybe it gets lost in the shuffle and you think about it as a typical kind of slugfest or whatever you want to call it. But it's like, no, I think the war aspect of it is really key. And this is different than, supervillains have attacked, or continuity is being rewritten, or there's antimatter or whatever. I mean, there's a real kind of practical, tactile aspect to all of this. And he's not equipped really to deal with something quite like this. And so that acknowledgement of it, that surrender to Lex. And I didn't clock that as keenly as you did. Really, that stark contrast between the words of comfort Lex is able to offer versus the little bit that Superman can muster. It's really something. And it's like, you talk about conflict. And like we said, I mean, this will continue to play out, especially I think in the Kelly and Casey issues, because Lois ends up going on this long-term trip with her mother around the world. And there's a little bit of a distance, both literally and figuratively, between her and Clark. But it's one of those things. It's like, you get both perspectives, right? It's like, of course, he would have been there if he could have been. He's being pulled in a million directions. But at the same time, it's like, this is her person, and she needed him more than ever in this moment, and he wasn't there. And even being rational and understanding everything that he's going through, still, it's like you can't help but feel hurt, let down, or what have you. So yeah, I mean, it's like he fails in this issue in a way that he doesn't always fail.
Yeah, well, also too, this is, I think that's what separates this crossover from a lot of the other big crisis events, is that this story feels a lot more personal in a way that those other ones didn't. They're much more about, rebuilding the universe or, fixing continuity or whatever. But this is a very personal story about the effects of war. And I think and moments like this really kind of drive that home. Now, also, I want to ask you about this because this stood out to me this time around. But at the beginning of the issue, Emil talks about how the multiverse has collapsed and been reborn, perhaps more than once. We cannot say with certainty. One thing we do know, however, is that it happens right here. Happened if you have a limited grasp of fluid space-time. Earth is the nexus for the collapsed realities, the linchpin that holds the current universe together. Copernicus is rolling over in his grave, but the mathematics do not lie. So here's a question I had for you. Do you think we can count this as kind of like a backdoor crisis event in some way?
It's funny you bring that up because as I was reading it, that obviously stood out to me. And that's as much as we get as far as like what you would typically associate with a crisis event. It's like or Earth is the nexus point, and if Earth falls, then he'll be able to hollow out the rest of the universe. I would rather not count this as a crisis, to be honest. I feel like that does it a disservice. I mean, on the one hand, if this were to be considered a crisis, maybe, I don't know, maybe that would get more eyes on it. Maybe that would kind of elevate its place in the Superman DC publishing history. So maybe that's enough of an argument.
Crisis on Our Worlds at War.
Yeah, right. But I don't know. Like I really like that it's not one of those. But that is a very good question. The last thing I would say about this issue, and this is not the fault of this story, but it really, and this has come up before, but it bothers me that there's plenty of tension between Sam Lane and Lois, and he's certainly not generous in his treatment of Clark Kent. So he's not the most endearing figure here, but I feel like the Sam Lane who I got to know in the Triangle era that I grew up in wasn't an outright villain. And I think the sacrifice that he makes here speaks to that. And then when he ultimately comes back in the New Krypton storyline, I mean, he is just full-fledged villain. And there's never any accounting for that shift. And I know we're at that point, we're post-Infinite Crisis, so maybe we can chalk it up to some continuity shenanigans. I don't know. But it's always been hard for me. Like, as much as I really did enjoy the New Krypton storyline, it's always been tough for me to square the Sam there with the Sam that we get here.
Yeah, Superboy Prime probably punched the wall too hard there.
Maybe.
But yeah, I thought, Sam got a lot of spotlight in this era, and I thought it was this whole idea of like, and this also applies to the current era, right? When you have like a super villain as president, do you answer the call when he calls you up to come and serve in your cabinet because maybe you can still do some good? And I think, he does some good here. Like, there's obviously some stuff here and there, but yeah, his sacrifice was very well done, and Lois's grief also very well handled. And just like this resentment she feels for some lingering kind of resentment, even if she knows it's not logical, it's still there, right? Kind of reminds me of that Superman and Lois episode when he misses that going to that city hall thing for her, and she says, "I know you're Superman. I know you had a good reason, and I know it's not logical, but I'm still pissed about it. So just let me stew."
Yeah, no, it's very natural. Oh, and then the line from Superman, he says, "I finally remember what I've been forgetting," and then it slips from my fingers right in that moment, and it's just. This whole time, like, I'm forgetting something. There's this buzzing. I don't know what it is. Like, he can't focus. He can't concentrate. He can't hear this call from the woman he loves the most, and he's not there for her. Yeah, a very strong issue.
I wonder if part of it is just like his subconscious, like after what he saw in Smallville, and it's just like kind of this, he's trying to segment things. So he's trying to focus completely on the Superman side of things. So maybe that's a subconscious reason, or maybe that's a metatextual reason why he can hear Wonder Woman, why he goes to Wonder Woman, but he can't hear Lois.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. A good question. Okay, Casualties of War. The final act of this event, August 2001, kicks off with Superman 173 by Loeb and McGuinness. And I love this whole war room setup at the beginning with Superman, Wonder Woman, Kyle Rayner, Adam's there, Dr. Magnus from the Metal Men. You've got Lex, you've got a Darkseid hologram. So we've got this whole brain trust here. And essentially the plan is to crack open Imperiex, to break that armor, and then to boom tube, to transport the energy that is released to one of these dead galaxies that Imperiex has hollowed out, because they recognize this energy, it can't be destroyed. Energy can't be created or destroyed, but they can transport it. So that's the plan. And then we have that discussion we were talking about earlier where Superman's essentially saying, like, barely crack open the probe. Like, what makes you think I'm going to be able to do this to Imperiex Prime? And that's when Strange Visitor steps forward. And the idea is Superman will take her in and she'll deliver the payload. So that's kind of the setup here. And then we're out in space on the ship en route to Imperiex Prime. And we get a couple of, I think, really important and personal interactions here where I guess they're the Black Hawk pilots, right? Who come up to Superman and ask him to autograph their helmet. And he uses his heat vision to do it. And he asks one of the pilots, like, where are you from? He's like, you wouldn't know. It's this little town. And he names it. And he's like, oh, like, isn't that on the Kansas border? Like, oh, it's really pretty when the leaves change color. And so I love that kind of, that personal connection that he's able to foster with them.
Yes. No, I love any time that Superman shows that he's not too big for the little guy. Anytime you have moments like that, I'm always there for it.
Yeah. And then I think a poignant conversation between Strange Visitor and General Rock, right? Where essentially he conveys this idea of like all the medals and ranks that they, want to pin on me. Like it's not worth anything. I would trade any of it for the life of one soldier I lost in my company or anyone else's company. He's like, you want your red badge of courage. Like it's not the accolades. It's the stain that you carry with you after the war. And it's a powerful moment because in this issue, General Rock will sacrifice himself. I think because the ship that he's piloting carries, what does he say, like 30 hydrogen bombs. And when we get to that World's Finest epilogue issue, it's this great, I know I'm skipping ahead, but he doesn't want the ticker tape parade. He doesn't want the pomp and circumstance. He's just buried, I think, right at Arlington National Cemetery.
Yeah.
And there's this great exchange between Waller and Lex where he's like, I don't get it. And she's like, yeah, with all due respect, Mr. President, like, you don't get it, right? Because the idea for Lex, who aspires to greatness and to be in this league of the all-time greats, is like the idea of just kind of this, quiet burial. It's like it doesn't compute. But for Rock, like that's what it was about. So I really like this moment between them.
No, I loved this speech he gives her, like that red badge of courage is a stain that every soldier gets on himself from every battle that won't come off. I'd trade anything to be forgotten in exchange for my forgetting what they want me to remember me for. And also when she says, but they made you a general, you're head of the Joint Chiefs. It's like, you think that means something to me?
Yeah.
Great speech. And I think I think in so often in any kind of fiction, I think there's that over glorification of war and honor and sacrifice and all that. And what I really like about this storyline is it doesn't do that. It presents it in as real as a context as war could be presented in, intergalactic war, but still it is a very true, if you talk to anyone who's been to war, that's what they sound like.
Yeah. Like this issue has to kind of do a lot with Strange Visitor in a really short amount of time. I mean, even with that Joe Casey setup issue that we talked about before, part of me still wonders, like, maybe a different character who we had spent more time with would have resonated a little bit more, but it's fine. We ultimately get to this final moment between Strange Visitor and Superman. And he's like, after this, I want to train you, bring you to the Justice League. And she's like, I'm not getting out of this. And we get this double-page spread drawn by Bill Sienkiewicz, where all of a sudden it's like everything stands revealed. She's like, I'm really Kismet. and essentially recounts what we, the audience, know, that they had placed the essence of Kismet in this young girl, Sharon Vance, who Clark saved from, she fell off the playground when they were kids. But as Strange Visitor reveals in these final moments, it's like the person who Sharon was actually did die that day. And what continued past that point was, I think they call it a wrinkle in reality. And so now this is going to be the final fate, but, you know, thanks Superman and whatnot. And then he takes her in as planned and plunges into Imperiex. Did the Strange Visitor sacrifice, did it resonate? Did you feel like it worked? Were you not as invested?
I mean, all the Kismet stuff, just like it made me feel like I'm missing some extra issues here to really understand what the hell is happening in these 2 pages. I mean, Bill Sienkiewicz's art, always a treat to look at, but I got no idea what this kind of went over my head, to be honest.
The thing is, it's a really deep cut. I mean, Kismet is this cosmic entity who had popped up from time to time. I mean, Adventures 500, where Clark and Pa are in the afterlife right before Reign of the Superman. Like that's kind of a key moment. But this business about her essence being placed within the body of this young girl, like that came at the end of that Dominus storyline.
Which I have not read.
You know, so I mean, like it's a pretty deep cut. And I wonder, part of me wonders if they wouldn't have been better served by just sticking with Strange Visitor herself, right? Like kind of opening this larger discussion about her cosmic essence. I mean, I don't know. I guess for those of us who had read the books and had the backstory, at least it was acknowledged. You know what? So I guess I can appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean, it was cool to see the Electric Blue S back again.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, an intriguing character that just didn't really did much with, but you know, she has this big sacrifice and the armor is cracked. And then we get the big turn where before Darkseid can transport the Imperiex energy away, Brainiac 13 reveals Warworld. Warworld absorbs the Imperiex energy, steals it for Brainiac's own ends, and also commandeers the Lex Tower on Earth and uses it to blast Apocalypse. So now it seems like Earth has fired on Apocalypse and has reneged on the Alliance. And that, of course, sets Darkseid off, and he vows vengeance at the end of that issue. Yes. So Superman's MIA, the armor's cracked, the energy has been stolen by Brainiac 13, who stands revealed, and they've aroused the ire of Darkseid. So yeah, this was a big one.
One other thing too, just the conversation between Superman and Lois, and this, you know, keeps going back to this, like the character stuff here. And it's like, here's a moment where they're both together after they both experience their own losses. But because he's as Superman, they can't comfort each other. They can't be there for each other. Right. And she even says, right, this is just heartbreaking when she says, you know, I miss Clark. And then she says, you have to go.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. No, it was a strong issue. So then we follow Superman into Adventures of Superman 595 by Casey and Wieringo. So Darkseid has sent his parademons. They're attacking Earth. Brainiac 13 essentially locks down the White House, and they're unable to communicate with the outside world or even physically leave. And Superman shows up on Apocalypse and has... I love this exchange with Graven, the son of Darkseid, who had been introduced in the Ron Mars Green Lantern run, where I think Graven has some line about like, oh, you have a knack for overcoming death. Well, you never faced me. And Superman's like, give it your best shot. And then you just get, I love the way this played out, where you just get like that, a silent panel or two, and then you just see Graven go flying through the wall. Oh, I love that. I love that. And then Superman and Darkseid come to blows, and it gets very metaphysical here. I didn't really love this aspect of it, but essentially Superman talks about how after that blast, I guess the essence of Kismet transported him outside reality, and he could look in and he realized how insignificant they are, which of course Darkseid doesn't want to hear. Like I said, I probably could have done without that metaphysical bit. Yeah,
I mean, I feel like that was just him trying to get under Darkseid's skin more than anything else.
Yeah. So while they're battling and whatnot, we have Warworld tendril lashes Apocalypse. So they send out this tendril. I mean, essentially what we're going to find out over these final few issues is that Brainiac 13 wants to extend these tendrils to Apocalypse and to Earth, and then continue to kind of expand the network from there. But these tendrils also cause untold destruction when they connect.
And we get the 3 dots.
Yes, exactly. So that comes together there. It also turns out, I mean, it's funny, for as many issues as we have and as many tie-in issues feel like, what are we really doing here? There's also like key stuff, like apparently Graven is in league with Brainiac 13 after all, or has fallen under the thrall of him at some point. So we have that, and Darkseid punishes him with his Omega Beam. But we also have Lena returns to Lex once again and reveals that she played him. And Lex also starts dealing with Ignition, which is going to lead to this alliance with General Zod to get out of the White House. And it ends with Superman and Darkseid realizing Brainiac 13 is the true ultimate opponent here, and Superman saying, "I'm going to kill him."
Yeah, that honestly, that moment didn't do much for me, because I think even at the time, just like, yeah, we know that's not going to happen.
I think it does feel a little a little false or forced, but that's the note that we go out on. So a lot happens in this Man of Steel issue, 117 by Schultz and Mahnke. And I love, this is narrated by Perry White via his war memoirs. Yes,
that was a great touch.
But yeah, so Lex enters this deal. So essentially, in exchange for help now, Lex is going to make Bacolistan this world power when all is said and done. And the Zod Imperial Guard, they get Lex into Lex Tower. And he encounters Lena again, the infant that he had exchanged to Brainiac 13 at the end of Y2K, who's now been aged up and is working for Brainiac 13. And he turns her. I mean, he turns her away from Brainiac 13. Essentially talking about how, like, we're Luthers, we do what we need to do. We make the hard sacrifices.
Yes.
How did this play for you? Because I thought this was a very, very interesting turn here.
Yeah, I thought, like, Lex has so many great moments in this event. Like, this is, as much as this is a Superman event, it's also a Lex event. And it's, like I said, this is my version of Lex that I gravitate towards. Like him, straddling this line between good and evil, and him, making these, types of this. Yeah, this worked for me. It totally worked for me, right? You're a Luthor, you value power in a way a soulless machine never could. You understand why we must sometimes eat our young. The time has come. Move past what was done, join your blood, learn from your father, learn from the best, and then teach me, Father. That worked for me.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I also really like too. So at the beginning of the issue, Maxima is like, the alien alliance is over. It's every planet for themselves, and she and Massacre lead this very futile assault on Warworld, and they're basically done for. But Superman intervenes and saves her, despite the fact that she basically blew him off earlier. And I like that because I think it's true to Superman's character and it says a lot, but it also then inspires the sacrifice on the part of Maxima, because now a tendril is extending from Warworld to Earth. And Maxima and Massacre crash their ship into it to try to stop it. And it does nothing other than like a momentary, like little blip. But they made that sacrifice, which is something. And I think it's at this point where Steel returns, the return. And that's the cover of this issue, is Steel in his armor and hammer. But he returns.
It's a great cover too.
It's a great cover, and he returns in the Entropy Aegis. And that combination of Imperiex energy and Apocalypse technology, he's able to sever the tendril between Warworld and Apocalypse. And even though the Maxima ship wasn't enough to stop the tendril from reaching Earth, we get another sacrifice. The Amazon sacrifice Themyscira Paradise Island. That mass apparently is substantial enough to stop or at least slow the tendril. So another big development. I don't remember that. What happens to Paradise Island after this?
I have no idea. Obviously it comes out okay because, like we were talking about in that Superman, Batman, Supergirl arc, right? The Doomsday Army invades Paradise Island. So
yeah. So, well, someone out there knows what happened to Paradise Island. Drop us a line. Let us know. We know ultimately it's okay, but a big sacrifice in that moment. And then Superman gets this idea. He doesn't share what it is, but he has this moment with Steel, and Steel's like, is there anything you want me to tell Lois? And he doesn't answer. And he flies into the sun.
To the sun.
Into the sun. Yes. I had kind of forgotten about that.
See, I remembered this happening, and I remember, and it's funny because my brain had kind of conflated this issue with the Strange Visitor one. So when I was reading the Strange Visitor, when I saw that cover, I'm like, oh, that's right. He goes in the sun in this and gets super charged up. And I read this. I'm like, oh, wait, I guess he doesn't. And then here he flies into the sun, and I tagged you on Blue Sky. I'm like, look, they did the thing. They did the thing.
They did the thing. Oh, man, I love it. Yeah, that final shot of him going into the sun. So speaking of the end, that's what's on the cover of Action 782 by Kelly and Kano. So we have Superman coming out of the sun, just all charged up. He's red. I mean, not unlike what you saw at the end of Superman and Lois season 2, kind of a similar sort of thing. But he's really just kind of in this fugue state. I mean, where he's just saying kill, like he's not even articulating the way we typically associate, but he will regain his humanity over the course of the issue. But he's really just kind of very single-minded as he returns. And so Lex has this plan. The Lex Tower, which is a product of the B-13 technology, was meant to be a coupling for the tendril from Warworld. But Lex has this plan to use it to destroy Warworld. There's this temporal displacement business about how they're going to shift like half the atoms a little bit into the future and it'll tear apart. But what they're not taking into account, and what Superman realizes when he's battling Brainiac 13 within Warworld, is that Imperiex is still there. Imperiex and that energy is still contained within Warworld. So if they blow up Warworld, all that Imperiex energy is going to be released and is going to cause this big bang that they've been trying to stop the whole time. So Superman asks for a quote unquote minor miracle. And so a lot kind of comes together here, but I thought it was interesting how all of it kind of came into play. So he calls for the temporal displacement of Warworld vis-a-vis the tower, as well as the spatial displacement of Warworld via boom tube technology, augmented by the magic of Tempest, who Darkseid needs to sort of effectuate this, fired into a steel in the entropy aegis, which acts as a crucible. And so essentially the temporal displacement from the tower, the spatial displacement from Apocalypse, fired into the crucible that is steel, is going to transport Warworld to the beginning of time, to the Big Bang. Because infinity times infinity is infinity. And essentially the Big Bang that Imperiex is going to bring forth and the actual original Big Bang will just sort of absorb each other. How did all of this play for you? Was this a satisfying payoff? Because I kind of love this.
I loved it. I love this kind of like wacky science stuff they come up with, and just like the fact that all the pieces are there, right? They seated it. They set it like Chekhov's gun in action, man. Like they did a great job setting all this up, and I forgot about this. So when I got to this point, I'm just like, oh my God, that is brilliant. That is such a, and also this is the thing I love because it's, I don't know. Are you much of a Star Trek fan?
No.
And neither am I, but do you know the Kobayashi Maru, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the Kobayashi Maru, for anyone who doesn't know, it's this, this impossible test, right? It's an unwinnable challenge that Starfleet gives, and it's supposed to be unwinnable because it's supposed to teach the trainees about that like sometimes there are no-win scenarios and there's no way to get out of it. And, Captain Kirk, he cheats on the test. He hacks this, he mentions it in Wrath of Khan, and then in the J.J. Abrams movie, they actually show him, they have him being up before the academic board and saying, like, he's like, I don't believe in no-win scenarios. I see Superman as the same way. He doesn't believe in this no-win situation. This idea of there's only these two choices. You have to choose one of them. Either you let Brainiac 13 do his thing, or you release me. There's no third option. He's like, nah, hell with that. I'm going to make a third option. He always finds a way. And that's what I love about it. The fact that Superman is going to do his best to find another way to fix this problem without compromising who he is I love that aspect of this ending. And just like how they bring it all together in a very creative way.
Yeah, man. Like that's a very apt comparison. I like that a lot. But yeah, he always finds a way. And I mean, more mechanically speaking, like when you say everything comes together, it's true. I mean, it's like you have all of these players, Lex and Lena and the tower. And look, I mean, this goes back to Y2K and the technology upgrading Metropolis and Lex's building in particular. And then all the business with Darkseid and the armor that he created for, like, all of it has a part to play, which I thought was great. And when you get to Superman, Brainiac 13, and Imperiex at the beginning of time, I do love this final moment of realization from Imperiex where he's like, oh, I see it now. The flaw in the universe. It's me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. By the way, on the note of Imperiex, only ever adapted, to my knowledge, one time. I mean, I don't know if he pops up in a video game or something, but the only like real significant adaptation was in the Legion of Superheroes animated series, which we talked about a while back. But there he was like a gladiator on Apocalypse who fought his way to the top. Like, he was not this cosmic entity. So it was similar in design and the name, obviously, but we really haven't gotten kind of, I think, a true adaptation of Imperiex, and definitely not of this storyline. But I just kind of wanted to say that on the Imperiex front. But I love that moment from him, and you got to help me out here. I feel like it was probably Brainiac 13, but one of them warns Superman about that there will be consequences to this.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Imperiex. Yeah, such
Imperiex.
A manipulation of universal order will not be without consequences.
And he says, you have the line right there, you can quote it, but something to the effect of like, well, isn't that what life is, right? Like, we make these choices that have consequences.
I know, but that's how it works, isn't it? Conflict and consequence, which ultimately leads to growth. All that death will not have been for nothing. This way, at least we stand a chance. Life marches on. And then he takes the baby Lena away too at the same time.
I love that. And that leads to a moment that I've quoted so many times over the years on the show, when he returns the infant Lena, although she still has the 3 Brainiac dots on her, but he returns the infant Lena to Lex. He says, like, I told you I would get her back. I mean, this is such a great full circle. That's why when I say we look at our Worlds at War as really kind of the climax of the Loeb Kelly era. I mean, this is a huge full circle moment where, and he says to Lex, he's like, we're small men in a large universe, Lex, and encourages him to stop trying to be a god and try to remember what it means to be a man. And I love this moment between them. Like, this is yet another instance. And once again, under Kelly's pen, where I just like, it feels like these are like two guys, like this is the kind of dynamic that they would have and the kind of exchange that they would have. But, I mean, and it's, I don't know, it's funny. It's like, in some ways Lex willingly gave up Lena in the first place. Is it more than Lex deserves at this point? Not that would matter to Superman anyway.
Right. No, that's a good question. And I don't know, but I think that's kind of the point, isn't it? Right. It's this, and Superman doesn't know either, but it's this, he's got to have faith that, Lex Luthor of all people can be redeemed. He's always going to try and extend an olive branch. He's always going to hold on to that hope that even the worst of humanity can be better. And I think that's, maybe some people would say naive, but I think there's also something beautiful about it too.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right. World's Finest, Our Worlds at War, written by Jeph Loeb. Art is by a number of different creative teams, including, a number of our regulars on the books. And, this is the big epilogue, and it's quote unquote narrated by General MacArthur's farewell speech.
Yeah. I got issues with General MacArthur. So. But it's the speech is used effectively though. Like all of them are.
Yeah. So we have Batman refusing to join them for any of the services. Right. And we realize right away, he's still trying to find Tim and the rest of Young Justice. They've been MIA. By the end of the issue, they do return. So there's a little bit of hope there. But there is a nice moment where Wonder Woman intervenes between Superman and Batman and just kind of makes the point, like, everyone mourns in their own way. Right. And we have to respect that with each other. So I like that moment with the Trinity there. One of my favorite vignettes in this one shot is the OG JSA members mourning Hippolyta, and they're playing cards, and drinking beers and whatnot. And I mean, there's great stuff. Jay has a line. He's like, oh, Hippolyta, like that face, like she could get me in trouble with Joan, like with just the look. But then they talk about how like she never played that card and she was part of the team. And Sand shows up and he's kind of chastising them. He's like, are you guys drinking? Like, we got to go. And I think it is Superman, right? Who's like, they'll be ready.
Yes, yeah, they won't be late, not them.
Not them. And then they suit up and they're ready to go honor their gal, as they say.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was I really love that.
There's the Arlington Cemetery moment you had mentioned before,
Yep.
which excellent interaction between Lex and Waller. Just these 2 pages and that's it, but it was really well done.
Yeah, I thought that was really strong. And just, in and of itself, I guess it would work fine. But when you couple that with that scene we talked about between Rock and Strange Visitor, it's like it all really ties together and is a nice payoff. We find out that Almerac has now fallen in line behind Mongal. That's their spoils of war. And, Superman and Wonder Woman don't press the issue, although obviously they're not in love with that situation. And then they go to Smallville to the statue in honor of Strange Visitor, and Sharon, that's her real name, boyfriend is there and is angry that she's seemingly already being forgotten. And there's this very powerful moment where he says to Wonder Woman and Superman, 2 people who lost, more than anyone.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if you had lost anyone, you would know what it feels like. And obviously, he doesn't know what he's saying, but you really see that registering with them.
Yeah, the look on their faces, I think, does a lot of good. I'm not sure who did the art on these pages, and not the best, but I did like the expressions they give on Clark and Diana in the last panel there.
Yeah, and then we have Sam Lane's funeral, which I believe plays out silently. We don't have any dialogue, but we see Clark is there, and then he changes to Superman, and they have full military funeral and firing squad and all of that. And then we end on a moment that we had addressed earlier of Superman taking Lois to what remains of the Kent farm and registering with Lois, right? Because she hasn't seen this, right? So she's taking all of it in. And that, like I said, that final moment of him saying, we won, right? Like we won.
So God, yeah.
It's, and like I said, like we end on this open question of what's become of the Kents. Are they out there? And we know it'll have a happy ending, but in and of this moment, and I like the choice that they made and the restraint that they showed here, because it would have been really easy. Like they give us the hope in the form of Young Justice is back. They're okay. They arrive home. But I think it would have been too much to give us one or both of the Kents at this point. I think you want to end on this note of uncertainty and loss, because I think that really represents what this was about. In that final moment, Superman says, he's like, your father, like everyone who fell, like they were the world's finest. I got to tell you, rereading this issue, I teared up by the end. Like I found it very moving.
I mean, looking at that last page, like I'm starting to feel it welling up a little bit in myself right now.
Listen, man, this was an epic conversation. I so appreciate you embarking on this reading project with me and having this conversation. I hope we did our Worlds at War justice. I like to think that we did. Maybe we've spurred a few people to check it out if this had been a gap of theirs. I don't know. And if that is the case, I really hope you guys enjoy it. And maybe you've already read the story once or many times, and this was a fun way to relive it. Maybe you're never going to read it, and this was the way that you experienced the story. But either way, I appreciate your participation in this. I appreciate everyone listening. What would you like to share with folks, or where would you like to direct them?
You can find me on superherocinephiles.com is the podcast. Percivalconstantine.com is my website. I've actually got a new book, a new trilogy coming out starting in the end of May, I think. So it's like May, June. I think the 3rd book will come out in July. So you can check out my website for all that stuff. I got a free serial that's available for at least a little bit more longer. It'll be available for free. Also, details about that are on the website, Power Rangers Inspired. So if you like that other podcast you did for a while, then you might want to check that out. And we are going to be re-releasing a bunch of Superman episodes that all the Superman movies we've covered. We're going to be re-releasing those episodes on Superhero Cinephiles to give me time to record some new stuff and also to get people psyched up for the new movie this summer.
Awesome. Well, I hope everyone will check that out. I thank you, audience. And again, make sure you come back for our bonus episode in a few days. Until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. Support the podcast and receive exclusive content, including bonus episodes, by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Flat Squirrel Podcasts is home to Digging for Kryptonite and another exciting episode in the adventures of Superman. Please subscribe, rate, and review today, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.